guessing, like a lot of you are about to do after watching Andor Season 2, I also rewatched Rogue One right after. I did this a couple of weeks ago, though, because on my channel I got to review the season very early, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. But I remember at that time they were already talking about rewatching the movie after that because it could recontextualize a lot of things. I've always really liked Rogue One. Even back when I saw it in 2016, it was a movie that I had a really great time with. But also there was a tragedy to the story, as you were following a group of rebels trying to get the plans to the Death Star, and very likely with the knowledge that they're not gonna make it out by the end of it. And as you watch the movie play out, I thought they did a really good job overall of bringing that story to the screen. It was in fact one of my favorite movies of 2016 as well. I still stand by those assessments, and I also think that there are things in the first act of the movie especially which are very shaky. But this is also a video that is taking into consideration that Andor just happened. And in my thoughts on Season 2, I did say that now having seen that series and this, there's a really solid trilogy at work here. And I think that's also because now certain things work very differently in Rogue One, and it really does feel like that series finale to Cassian Andor, even literally so, because this is where he meets his fate. But I think when you go back to it now, when you look at these more gray areas that they had established in Rogue One, and you look at everything that Andor did in the 2 seasons of the show, all of the decisions, it's all taking a very different toll on him. Because it's been a long time of just going around, getting information, not always trusting everybody, leaving a lot of people dead in the process, and then hopefully leading to something that could take down the Empire. And that process is slow and long, and there's not always a lot of friends, but there are those who are willing to fight back, and that's how you end up creating a much larger network. Eventually that code line, which is constantly said in the series of, I have friends everywhere, it really does make an impact when you're watching this, I think, because the characters that show up in here, the ones who are really trying to make a difference, they are just people in the galaxy who want to see some change, who believe in the cause of a rebellion against the Empire. And so that characteristic is really enough in a lot of ways to keep things going. Like when you get to Jeddah and you meet Chirrut Îmwe and Baze Malbus, like it's very clear that they've lost a lot. And when you look at the Kyber that is being harvested from Jeddah and it has completely ruptured everything, there is an obligation to stick it to the Empire, and so eventually they spring into action as well. Now, of course, the main character in Rogue One is not Cassian, it's Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, and you're seeing it from her perspective, and her being the daughter of Galen Erso, who is the architect of the Death Star. All of this coming together also just makes sense, because the idea of a Death Star across this show that we just watched was a conspiracy for the longest time. This idea that something like that could not exist, and everything that was going on surrounding it was a lot of smoke and mirrors work to try and hide the fact that a planet killer was being worked on by the Empire. Something to completely wipe out any oppression and any resistance towards them once and for all. And the way that they're going about it by causing much smaller but also much more devastating atrocities while serving a higher purpose, it's something that goes back to what the speech is in Andor. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than it is to hide behind one big thing. And that's something that you explore over there. But the fact that the bigger thing that they're eventually leading towards is the building of the Death Star, it makes that mission a lot more personal. And so immediately Jyn being a part of this makes sense. And you're already rooting for her to hopefully fix this in some way and succeed in our mission of getting the Death Star plans. And then you connect that back to Krennic, and you just see that this is a man who is very close to the upper echelon of the Empire, while everybody else that we've seen was below. And I think that how they established that too, that power dynamic, especially now having seen the series, which I'm going to keep going back to, you just look at that with him being the superior officer that everyone's afraid of. And in Rogue One, seeing the power dynamic shift as to the fact that to them, he is, a member of the ISB. They're the ones who are like, cowering in fear sometimes, or just, not really sure of what to do and being constantly undermined. In this case, with Tarkin and then subsequently Darth Vader, it's something that where he is looked at as, as just kind of a pawn in the game. And I think it's the way that they explore that is really, really cool. And I think you see two different versions of Krennic as a result of that. I think that's one of those really well-handled things, and that needle is threaded very nicely. But speaking of needles that are threaded very nicely, now it makes more sense to see characters like Vader show up. Now there's nothing to hide behind, because now that the people who already oppress whatever the Empire has been doing, and all of the different, activities that they've been partaking in when it comes to oppressing people across the galaxy, now there's a louder voice, because now there's a legitimate threat to everybody's existence involved. And so it goes from trying to do things in a more governmental-like state with the more fascistic ideologies in place, and instead goes straight for the jugular when it comes to what they really want to say. If the Gorman massacre was just a drop in the bucket for them, like, an inkling of what they can do, now you have the Death Star, which even with a single reactor can, wipe out an entire city. And the fact that it can make that happen is really terrifying. Contextually, it works so much more now. Like, Krennic has been failing in his duties when it comes to being the project manager of the Death Star. There are constantly security breaches and leaks that are happening, something that Tarkin also references in Rogue One. But since that movie was written when there was no knowledge of an Andor show ever happening, and at that time, they were still working with the fact that the one breach that happened was with Galen Erso sending out a pilot who could have information about the Death Star, and has a message from Galen as well that would hopefully reach Jyn at some point. That is the breach that we hear about. But it makes so much more sense now that when he says breaches, you now look at everything that has happened with what Clea did, what Luth and Rael did, what of course Cassian and Bix have been doing, and that massive framework of that big tapestry that now is there, that it makes for a much more cohesive story. Speaking of little details that they've added in, with Saw Guerrera as well, when he first appears, being as paranoid and as buzzed out as he clearly seems to be with all the years of, more extremist work that he's been doing as he's been fighting against the Empire, he's clearly on something else too. Like, something else is, guiding his judgment. And when he has that oxygen apparatus on him and he takes a breath from it, now I'm pretty sure, 99% sure that's Rhydonium, which is what you saw in episode 5, I think, of season 2, where he's basically just puffing fumes, and that is really, switching up his entire mentality when it comes to some things. He's addicted to that. He has gone and resorted to methods which are unsavory in a way that the rebellion is also now opposing them. It's like, listen, we gotta rein this guy in, or we gotta do something about this. Like, I don't know. But since Galen knows Saw, and since there is still a trust there, especially with what Saw did for Jyn when she was still a kid, especially after Lyra was killed by the Death Troopers and Krennic, it makes sense that that's who he would reach out to. And when Jyn eventually gets there, that, interaction with them is like, it's of course, there is something to it which you kind of realize just what a big threat that they're facing is, and the reality of the Death Star comes into perspective, that this is not just some false news, some fake equivalency that is being pushed around. Like, Clea is the only source who can confirm that But now there's more clarity because eventually when Cassian goes on his first mission, that also seems to confirm something when the contact who he meets and then kills, which makes a lot more sense now when you look at everything else, like why he would do something like that. To even creating a bigger trust when it comes to those who want to help out. But it's very clear that there is something that is plaguing him, and it's this one line which Chirrut says, in fact, when they're in the holding cell in Jeddah.
There is more than one sort of prison, Captain. I sense that you carry yours wherever you go.
A lot of stuff comes into play now after that line, doesn't it? All the things that Cassian has done that we've seen in the series as well, from all the people that he's encountered across the galaxy, the people that he's killed, and the missions that he's gone on, all of it taking a toll on him. And I feel like somewhere when Bix left, I feel like that just, like whatever was left in him, that thing like sort of grounding him, was also gone. And it just feels like all of it is sort of bubbling up inside of him and really just, you know, making his life even more clouded and even more tragic in a way than it was before. And the tragedy of that arc really comes full circle towards the end when they do infiltrate Scarif, Jin, and everyone else. And with all of these rebels and all of these characters who are now, you know, joining along, like Melshi as well. I'm so glad they gave him a little bit more to do in Andor as well. Just really gave some more time to that character, and getting to see how K2SO became involved in all of this. When all of those eventually play out, those moments, you know, they feel so much more impactful now. I also love that the story really does continue that path of giving second chances to everyone. That's something that Andor, the series, introduced, and now going into Rogue One with Jin especially looking for a better path, probably. Like, okay, I get to get my charges dropped and all that, but the story is so much more personal, isn't it? Like, she's also looking for some kind of vengeance against Orson Krennic. The fact that her mom is still dead because of this man, and the fact that he has upturned her entire family's life. She hasn't seen her father in years, and all of those things coming together as the movie's climax begins with every character. When you think about it, everyone has been influenced in a way by what Krennic has done. And I love that at the end of the day, Cassian is the one who shoots him, and even though that doesn't kill Krennic, the final death blow to him is a strike from the Death Star, the reactor ignition. That is poetry right there. His big creation, the thing that he put everything into, is what ended him. That is how you wrap up that story as well. And the fact that eventually the thing that Cassian inadvertently was a part in building while he was on Narkina 5, as, you know, building those parts which eventually went into the Death Star, and eventually finding the plans for that with Jin, which helped the rebellion take down the Death Star. That is, again, poetry. It's all very well woven together. I really, really love it. Clearly, what I'm saying right now mostly relates to the show that we just watched, but at the same time, the movie itself, I said this back in the day, that video is not there now because this is the one that you're watching. I always, like I said, I really liked the movie. I thought the performances were great. I thought Gareth Edwards' direction, for the most part, was really, really good too. I thought Tony Gilroy's writing, which is the stuff that he brought in, along with Chris Weitz, I think was pretty strong overall. The first act, yes, is still a bit jumpy. I think there are some things that do happen which don't necessarily always connect together, and some aspects could have been fleshed out a little bit more for sure. Eventually, overall, by the end of it, I mean, you still have a story of an impending doom and just people fighting to, you know, so that everyone else can see a brighter day, a sunrise that they will not see. And by the end of Rogue One, I think, you know, you still get a very satisfying conclusion to everything, a tragic conclusion to everything. I'll give a spoiler warning here, though, because I just want to hone in on one thing. So if you haven't seen Andor Season 2 yet, one more thing. Knowing that Bix is on Mina Rao with Cassian's child, the fact that Cassian never knew that he had a kid is incredibly sad. And At the same time, I'm glad that a part of him lives on and Bix lives on. It's really good to know that. And so, rewatching the movie, from the really great action sequences, Greg Fraser's incredible cinematography, Michael Giacchino's score, which comes under some fire sometimes because it's maybe the fact that it was like the first major score that John Williams didn't do at the time, but also it was done in like a month's time, so some things probably weren't, as refined as they could be. But even for a month's work, really good stuff. I really like the score to Rogue One, in fact. All the performances were really solid, from Felicity Jones to Diego Luna, Ben Mendelsohn, Mads Mikkelsen, Donnie Yen, Zhang Wen, Riz Ahmed. Everybody did a fantastic job over here. Alan Tudyk as K2SO. Really love this character. This droid is awesome. I also always just liked the idea that the Death Star plans were named after Jin's name, like nickname that Galen had for her, Project Stardust. I just feel like it's the perfect thing, because so much of the stories which have been told about the rebellion with this arc have all been so personal. There's something about it that just feeds into that ties every character together in a way that isn't necessarily connected to something massive. It is, but you know what I mean. But like, just there is those emotional beats to all of those things, and the fact that that's what eventually leads to them finding the plans in that massive data bank archive at Scarif. I thought they did a really great job with it. So yeah, I do recommend checking out Rogue One once again, now that you've probably seen Andor. If you haven't, I just spoiled the shit out of it for you. But I think it just makes for a really great experience. And I do recommend it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video of a mishmash of thoughts that I had, and it's been so much fun to discuss all of this with you. Guys, thank you as always for watching. Look forward to more videos very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. May the Force be with you.